Well, welcome everyone to another session of Stockbridge online poetry series.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I'm going to try that again. Can you hear me a little better now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So I was wanting to welcome all of you to Stockbridge Library Association's online poetry series, Medicine for the Soul. Started way back in April with the idea of a 4 reading series for the month of April, which is Poetry Month. And here we are, cresting mid-December and going strong with our weekly readings. So we're excited about that. It's nice to see your faces joining us today. And we are happy to have with us Margo Stevers, who is going to read for us. Margo has several poetry collections, including Cracked Piano, Ghost Moose, The Lunatic Ball, The Hudson Line, Frozen Spring, and Reading the Night Sky. She co-authored Looking East, William Howard Taft in the 1905 U.S. diplomatic mission to China, which I don't believe is a book of poems, but I could be wrong. And her poems and essays have appeared widely in magazines and anthologies, including Poem a Day on poets.org, Prairie Schooner, Connecticut Review, Cincinnati Review, Upstreet Plume, and Salamander. Margo is the founder of the Hudson Valley Writers Center and founding and current co-editor of Slappering Hall Press. And Margo is joining us today from Sleepy Hollow, New York, with a lovely background from beautiful Poole, Maine. Margo, thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing you read for us.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Wendy is the director of Stockbridge Library, and I wanted to thank John Gillespie, who will apparently be coming soon, who is board president of the Stockbridge Library. And also thank you to my friends who are here. Thank you for being here. And I was just going to read some poems, basically concentrate on poems about the environment, but also read some ekphrastic poetry that I've written because John mentioned that he likes ekphrastic poems, and a few others. So anyway, I'm going to begin with a couple of poems from my first book, Frozen Spring. This one begins with an epigraph by Faith McNulty, who was a naturalist. And if anyone can't hear me, please let me know. Ascension. It takes 7 strong men to drag the 6-foot heart of a blue whale across the deck of a whaling ship. Beads of sweat well up on the sea-stained faces of the 7 men who bear the still warm heart of the blue whale to the boiling vats. The men are deliverers. They tug, rip, tear the heart across the deck to the seething pots. But their hands stick to surfaces like fly paper and recoil, the red matter teething into fingers as if leaching out the blood. Ventricles, gaping mouths stand ajar. Red smoke rises in the darkening mist. Harsh wind raps against crevices, something trying to get back in, tapping out an aberrant beat, and something whines long and low, a sea moan. Only a crane can lift a 6-foot heart, and as the last inch of the raised organ recedes into the stewing vats, dismembered parts of the heart ascend and billow over the deck. 7 men inhale the vision, their hearts slackening with each breath. Well, I hope I didn't scare absolutely everyone away with that poem. The next poem that I'll read is titled Conversation with Bertolt Brecht, and it refers to Chilean songs of revolution. I was thinking of Victor Jara, who lived from 1932 to 73. He was a teacher, poet, and singer-songwriter who was tortured and killed during the Pinochet dictatorship. He was rounded up with many others in a stadium, which has now been renamed the Victor Jara Stadium, where soldiers crushed his fingers with the butts of their rifles and murdered him only days after the coup that brought Pinochet to power. This poem begins with an epigraph by Brecht. Conversation with Bertolt Brecht. Solely because of the increasing disorder in our cities of class struggle, some of us have now decided to speak no more of cities by the sea, snow on roofs, women. As if the Chilean songs of revolution would bring back the gray fishing boats, sailing through frail, deepening waters at dawn, and the seagulls making earthly sounds. As if these songs could restore the balance the driven leaf, nail old and rusted, shoved through the bent bough. Each step through mirrors brings us back to the pitch of sleeplessness, the unstrung dream, an oil slick on an ocean still and black. As if all the songs of revolution could bring the murmuring tree back, could restore wind to the rigging, full sail to the morning light. How many years, messages, wars, strange incidences, ironies. The wary eye of the mother wanted to protect her child, promise more, cities near the sea, clear waters, full sail, the morning light. I wanted to screen share, but I need to, in order to screen share, I was wondering if Wendy could enable me to screen share, or maybe John, who I just was hoping to screen share some poems. Okay, great, thanks. I mean, not poems, I'm hoping to screen share some images. Here's the first one, which is Woodblock by Utagawa Kuniyoshi. And the first poem that I will read, the first ekphrastic poem that I will read is titled The Nightly Weeping Rock. Along the Tokaido roadway, how heavily her bare feet intrude against rock borders, how the edges gash her toes, exposed, bearing the weight of her unborn child. How she cares for the child, how her body is given entirely to it, so that she would sacrifice anything for its survival. Full with child, she walks for miles from Edo to Kyoto, where her husband waits. Behind the rock which now weeps for her, the murderous form, a stranger so quiet even he forgets his breath, crouches down and sees nothing, neither lichen nor granite. He lunges at her, and how her blood overflows its borders. There is nothing she can do. How her spirit rises up, how she looms before her husband, how she hands him the child, so helpless, so perfectly dressed in the kimono, how the etching grieves her face, wraps it like bandages on wounds that never heal, how her husband leans away, his leaden brow, the moon so full, blackened limbs around it. And I was going to read now some poems from my book, Crack Piano, which was published in 2019. There's the cover. You can see that there's a kind of tormented piano on the cover. In the latter half of the 19th century, as part of a humanistic movement in the treatment of mental patients, hospital superintendents sometimes held balls, and spectators were also invited to some of them. Several of the poems in this book are about the thin line between sanity and insanity, about my great-grandfather Peter Rawson Taft, after almost dying of typhoid fever and never fully recovering. He was briefly hospitalized in the Cincinnati Private Hospital for the Insane and attended such a dance. The Lunatic Ball, after Dance in a Madhouse. And I forgot that I was going to screen share an image, so let me do that quickly. Sorry about this. I think I have to figure out how to move the cursor on this, which isn't really working. There it is. Okay, this is the image for this poem. Furious dancing gives way to screams. 5 men stare ghoulish at the wall. This is a lunatic ball. The best student Yale had ever seen. 3 months after graduation, typhoid, brain swelled inside his skull. They dosed out calomel. 5 ghosts appeared in a mercury dream. Headaches unbearable. This is a lunatic ball. Married 1 year, baby the next, his wife filed for release. The medical textbooks he gleaned, futile, endless stall. A woman names her baby doll Christ, lurches, leans, a building in an earthquake, then she crawls. This is a lunatic ball. 1 man plays a flute, calls himself Faunus. Another uses an invisible latrine. Attendants haul out a wild man in a straitjacket on a wooden beam. A woman growls like a bear. This is a lunatic ball. Behind a glass wall, well-dressed spectators riveted sit amused. Looking at them, the patients know they are through. Spectacled men sport greatcoats and laced up women make jokes in the shimmering hall. The next ekphrastic poem that I will read from this collection is titled Horse Fair, and it was inspired by the Horse Fair, a painting by Rosa van Eur, who originally, well, she showed the painting at the Paris Salon in 1853 and finished it in 1855. And it's now on view at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Lunatic Ball. I'm sorry, I don't mean the lunatic ball. Sorry. I meant Horse Fair. Horse Fair is what I'm reading. Horse Fair. In men's clothes, she makes herself invisible to examine anatomy at the slaughterhouse. She obtains a police permit to wear trousers while she sketches. At the horse fair, she draws horses pulling, snorting, heads bumping, thrashing, hooves pounding, tails ringing, charging forward, rearing, bucking, wheeling, disappearing into darkness. Hooves hammer, whips crack, horses writhe between seer and seen. The fairground a battleground. Frenzied pitch, cymbals clash, arms flail, whips raised against the horses' arched and shining necks. Eyes bulge, terrified. The dapple gray, the roan, pulled away toward thunder. And another ekphrastic poem that I'll read was inspired by Van Gogh's self-portrait when he had a bandaged ear. And it's titled Van Gogh to His Mistress. He sensed his ear, but he could not see it. In the blind, this is called blind sight. The last failed effort of the body to survive. Keep this object carefully. The ear rested on the table alone among blue tints and suppressed shadows. To present an ear in the middle of the night, an arterial flap of bat's wing, wing of angel. And then let's see what. I also want a number of the poems in this collection, Cracked Piano, are also on the broad theme of motherhood and some poems focus on the subjugation of women. I thought I would read Splitting Wood. It was the thought of his entering their infant's room that drove her. She remembered his face the first time she saw him. Now, half gone from whiskey, eyes hooded like a hawk's, he said he'd kill the children when he woke. The neighbors heard it, the screams, they heard. His workman's hand, his gnarled hand dangled down. The knife lay by the bed. She slipped from the covers while he slept, placed her feet on the floorboards, just so. The dogs barked outside, snapdragons, flowered tongues, and all the wired faces of the past strung up. The axe hung on the porch woodpile nearby, each log plotted uneasily entwined. The children's tears were rain, tears were watering the parched hills. The wild moon foamed at the mouth, the wild moon crept softly at her feet. The arms that grabbed the axe were not her own, that hugged it to her heart while he slept were not hers, the cold blade sinking in his skin. She grew up in the country splitting wood. She knew just how much it took to bring a limb down. And I'd like to read an elegy for my mother and for nature. My mother is dying. In the place where she belongs, suffering erases itself. Doves bring her seeds. Horses sleep next to her in the straw. Where she belongs, a welcoming place holds her, keeps her from running away, the greenness of the hay turning to gold. Already the rain's restless trajectory. My mother is busy dying. She no longer knows my name. This is the wind of Eden, the wand of change, the last slave of silence, the knave of rain. So quiet the roving of each vacant quest. Let her be buried in the sea by the seaberry, the briar rock, the fossil chamber. A lone, blown roadside stray, the flown, restless, wayward ringing, bells clang, ocean downcast rolls. Wandering once again, now I return to the center, searching the level earth, calling her name, remembering that I am lost. The path unfurls before my dog and me, walking to the rocks, the ocean on one side, the bay on the other, eiders blessing the waves. The seagull's spontaneous burst, how it hurts with the radio blaring. My mother is dying, gone from a body that has abandoned her. Cry because everything goes haywire, because this is Apollo's siren lyre, the field-worn answer, the childless response, children waiting for some God to bring them home. And couple of my poems are from my chapbook, Ghost Moose, and I wanted to read one ekphrastic poem from that collection, which is, this is not a very good image of it, but it's based on Winter Landscape with Skaters and Bird Traps by Peter Bruegel, 1565. And it was written, it was actually painted during the Little Ice Age. And that was a time when there was because of massive volcanic eruptions, I think there were several of them, they caused a cooling effect. And there were also changes in the Arctic ice cover, and it caused an ice age, a little ice age. 3 ravens watch. If you were a smooth, shiny circle, we would collect you for our nests, but your bodies shuffle mindlessly back and forth. You forget when the ice was thin, when many of you fell through, engulfed underneath. This harshest winter attracts you to skate, to forget your misery, scrawling icy patterns. Ravens, 3 of us, stand sentinel, noticing your slow-witted motions, your ugly sprawls. From our high perch, we witness eerie cries of brothers and sisters lured inside your net strung across the trees. We hear them crash to the bottom, caught on the great awl, entangled in the glistening awfulness, your persistent web. You who now skate, do not forget that you will return to your endless winter, bread riots, witch hunts, old widowed women targeted, and frozen birds falling from the sky. We know that you want to eat us. Snow fell in July, men froze to death in September. Grapes for wine would not ripen. Parasites thrived under snow and destroyed your crops. You carry your corpses in carts. Your dead litter the ground in shrouded cloth. Branches extend over ice, harbingers of death. We know that you want to eat us. You believe witches cause livestock epidemics, make cows give too little milk, create early frosts and all the unknown diseases. Witch trials can stop bad weather. Ye gripping trap made of yarn, the lowest bar and the hoop with two clickets, the devil scourge of all the earth. Remember, ice will again be as thin as this diffused light. And then I wanted to read a poem. Many of the poems in this chapbook are on the effects of the sixth extinction, which we are currently living through, which of course is one of the greatest mass extinctions in the history of the earth. And this poem that I want to read is in honor of the 1,100 dolphins that washed ashore in France. They were mutilated because they were trying to get to the surface to breathe, and they were not able to. So they were all mutilated, and they never said why they were mutilated in the news reports. But trawlers now work in pairs and drag a net between them, and as a result, the European dolphin is on its way to extinction. This begins with an epigraph. Ballad of the Dolphin. Ancient Greeks said they should be treated as humans. Their sailors would not kill dolphins. How I have thought of you caught in the fishermen's nets. They would set them to trap you to catch the tuna that swam under your schools. How the fishermen hung you still alive, upside down. Your cries brought others. Fishermen grabbed you by your tails, strung you and turned you head down in water, tied you to lifting hooks and dragged you to the docks. If any of you were still alive when they slung you on cement, they stabbed you. How last survivors churned the water red, leaping in panic, waiting to die. In a good catch, it took them 3 days to kill all of you. How mothers whose calves were entangled could not lift them to the surface. They listened to their helpless underwater clicks and sighs. How often I thought of the whale skippers who would radio the location of hundreds of you, allowing tuna fishermen to track down your entire pod. Think of their nets deep, foaming, wide, so that hundreds could fit inside. How they used underwater sound to confuse and drive you down. How many of you drowned? Fishermen did not want to compete with you, but killing you was not enough. How they used the screams of several to slaughter more. How one of you hangs from the prow, still alive, calling, calling. And I'll just read one more poem, which is titled Ocean Birds. Jealous is the night, the feckless night, coming over us as water into sea, the forceful day's geography turned black. Your body is the sea I float upon, your skin becomes the waves. Nothing will ever bring you here to me, nothing will ever call you back. Thank you for listening.
Yes, bravo. Thank you for reading for us, Margo.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's beautiful. I appreciated the screen share.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, Margo, sorry I was late. I had to have my annual eye exam. So I've got
That's
the eye
okay.
disease, so it's always important. So I did have a question on those poems with accompanying artwork. Did did the art inspire the poetry, or I'm trying to understand, the cart before the horse, or the horse after the cart, or next to the cart. Uh,
Well, the last one I read, actually, I received a request on LinkedIn. This is the only time this has ever happened, from someone who claimed that he was going to do an anthology on poems on Bruegel painting, poems about Bruegel paintings, and he asked me to submit one. And I never heard from him, but I did write the poem. Just it was like, I guess I was definitely inspired by the painting, but it was interesting to learn about the Little Ice Age. I had never heard about that really so much before, and it was quite an incredibly crazy time, just like now, pretty much, maybe in its own way, probably just as bad. Um, but let's see, I'm trying to think. And also I was definitely inspired by the Japanese print, The Nightly Weeping Rock, that inspired the poem. I would say the lunatic ball, I was really interested in the idea of a lunatic ball. So I think I wanted to write the poem, and I kind of found the artwork that went with it, which I thought was pretty amazing to see. And what was the other one? Oh, Van Gogh. Well, that was definitely just about what happened with Van Gogh and his cutting his ear off and the tragedy of his life. And so but I thought, I don't know, I can't even remember. It was so long ago that I wrote that poem, but I know that I revised it over years and years and years. So I don't think I was necessarily inspired by the painting, but I was really interested in it. I mean, in other words, I think I would have written the poem just because I was interested in what had happened to Van Gogh.
yeah, nice, nice.
I think for horse fair. Well, I've grown up loving horses and being with horses, so I was amazed to see Van Gogh's painting. When I saw it, I thought it was incredible painting. And I think it inspired, I think that inspired me to write the poem. But I was always interested in horses.
Margo, who's the name of the painter again?
Rosa Bonheur, Bonheur.
Okay.
She was such an interesting woman to read about. She's really worth reading about her life. And she did a lot of very beautiful paintings of animals. And she did some children's stories also, or maybe someone else did them using her paintings. That might have been what happened. But yeah, she's great.
I have a question, Margo. You just referenced working on a poem over the course of years. Do you ever work on poems that have already been published? Do you circle back to them?
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. I guess not so much after they've been published in a full-length book, although I might, but if I had I don't know, I might, but usually I definitely would first of all, I revised poems over the course of, at least 40 years, but I would definitely revise a poem. I mean, I think, as Jeffrey, you might have said this, poetry is revision. Were you the person who said that? I mean, poetry.
Right, it's probably true.
Yeah, poetry is so much about revision.
I think Peter said that last week.
I don't know, but yeah. I think revision is almost as important as writing the poem. Although there's some poems that one writes and they just happen and they never need to be revised. That doesn't, at least in my case, I'm sure it happens to some people all the time. How about you, Jeffrey? Does it happen to you?
I revise a lot. I don't always revise much after something comes out in a book, but I had a little selected poems come out in 2006, and I think I changed a word or two in a couple of the poems, but they were early poems. There is kind of a history of people, you know, doing that that's not so great. Like nobody really likes Wordsworth's 1840 prelude as much as the 1804 one. So people seem to think that, I haven't really made a study of it, but that maybe that wasn't a great idea to go back and rewrite stuff that he wrote in his youth. And then I really like Whitman's first version of Leaves of Grass, even though it's missing a lot of things. Like Song of Myself is, some of those poems are better in that first version, which is really easy to get too. So I don't know, it's kind of a thorny topic.
Well, have you ever written a poem and never had to revise it? You just let it stand?
Not really. I mean, there's one or two poems that came really easily and they're short, but I probably still revised a couple of words, but usually I have stacks and stacks of revisions. What about you?
Well, definitely. Usually that's the case. I know there's at least one poem I wrote on the way to my brother's funeral, and I just wrote it, but that's so unusual for me.
Well,
and I never changed it.
That's really interesting. You guys know that Margo and I are cousins, so I know which brother she's talking about.
Yeah.
And also the one that I was talking about, I wrote really soon after my brother's death. So it sort of just came easily. I was in the Metropolitan Museum of Art looking at a sculpture and I sat down and wrote the poem. So that's unusual.
Yeah. Hi, Dave. Hi, Dave.
You know, it'd be interesting to, I don't know how, maybe it's interesting to me, not the poets, but, you know, to see maybe, you know, 5 different versions of a poem, you know, how it iterated over time. It just would be, you know, panel to panel to panel, you know, just I'm interested in how one would interpret the different versions.
I know someone who writes a blog on that very process, and I did that for Van Gogh to His Mistress. I participated in her blog. Interestingly, she was banned from Facebook because some woman got on the blog and started swearing or something, and so they banned her from Facebook. She can't get her blog on Facebook anymore.
Wow.
Which is so bizarre considering all the things that aren't banned on Facebook.
Yeah.
Also, it doesn't sound like it was her fault.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. And then to ban something on poem revision just seemed so crazy, but I guess that's life in the fast lane these days.
Interested in the discussion the two of you just had a moment ago. And it seems like you both wrote poems that didn't need revision in, you know, in these moments. I don't know if it was grief necessarily, but related to death. And I wonder if you know, if you have any perspective on that. Do you feel like you were more raw, more open, more honest, more talented? You know, what was it about those moments? Or did you just not want to revisit that feeling?
Not the latter. What about you, Jeffrey?
Well, you didn't really answer.
Oh, well,
She did.
I mean, okay, I'll answer. I think that the poem just, because of, it was such a, I'm sure with Jeffrey too, just something that I didn't expect to have happen, even though I knew my brother had problems, and I just never thought that he would die. And so it was so shocking to me that it wasn't something I thought about or planned or anything. I just was on the airplane going to his funeral, and I just wrote this poem titled Losing Sight. And it just happened. I mean, because I think of my shock and grief and, I don't know, terror about what happened.
In my case, that one poem I was talking about, I think it's very similar. You know, it was just the power of the grief in that moment. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, I mean, it sort of propelled me into the poem and through the poem, but I'm not sure that means it's necessarily going to be a good poem. But
Mhm. Yeah.
and then I wrote a whole lot more poems about my brother's death that went through a ton of revision. So
Yeah.
so it's a kind of complicated, that relationship with grief. I mean, for me, like working on those poems that needed revision was a way of sort of maybe dealing with my grief in some way, or being in grief with, you know, finding the language for grief.
Yeah. My first book, I mean, I think like some of Jeffrey's books, my first book was really about my father's death because he died when I was 12, and then my brother's death. And I think in both of those cases, it was kind of an unexpected reality, an unexpected phenomenon. And I spent a lot of my time trying to deal with the feelings that I had about it. And it took really, I think writing the book sort of helped me expel this incredible pain that I felt as a result of both things happening. And anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, the cracked piano has a lot to do with my great grandfather's death, and I never knew him, but I just became kind of obsessed with his life as well, because it was equally shocking in its own sad way.
Yeah, it is amazing how events, pictures, conversations trigger different creative expression. And I think that's one of the things I've really enjoyed during our whole series is just listening to all the different ways that poets get inspired. It truly is amazing. I don't know if other writer, I don't know what other, you know, or you know, movie producer, I don't know. You know, the whole thing is I only know part of the poetry world. So I don't know how other people do on their creative stuff.
Yeah. Well, you had asked other people that question about their writing process, and I was trying to think about different elements of what I did during my life. But I think one of the most important things for me was keeping a notebook, and I kept a notebook the most when my children were young and I had to be at home for their nap, and you know, I just wrote the whole time and wrote all these things that went on in my mind. I'm still going back to those notebooks and making poems, like the elegy that I read for my mother. My mother's dying, that I wrote recently, but it's almost all writing that I did, I don't know, well, at least 20 years, 30 years ago, 20 to 30 years ago. So, and a lot of the poems that I've written have come from my notebooks. I think that's such a really important thing to do. And I'm sorry that I was just thinking I should make a New Year's resolution and start doing it again, but I don't know. Do you keep a notebook, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I do. I've got a lot of them over the years. I don't always go back very far though. Sometimes I'll like sift through one that's like 2 notebooks back and see if there's anything that I forgot about, and other times I'll remember that I wrote something about something and I have a new sort of angle on it and so I'll look for it in a previous notebook.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Very amazing.
I mean, I remember when I was at Sarah Lawrence getting an MFA, Michael Burkhart, I took a class with Michael Burkhart. I don't know if you ever read his poetry, but he would say, you should just duck in a corner and write. And I remember he one time didn't take a job at Sarah Lawrence, but instead worked at Bloomingdale's because I guess he thought it would be better for his writing. But anyway, something like that was strange. But so anyway, I always thought that was great advice. And I do think that some of the best ideas for writing come in dreams or in, you know, just moments when you aren't thinking about trying to write a poem. And yet I still have never been very good about ducking into a corner to write a poem or whatever. It's, I don't know. I wish I were better at that.
I like the image of it though.
Yeah.
Well, Margo, thank you again so very much
Thank you.
having a discussion with us and reading for us. I'll send you a link to the recording that you can share. It will be on our website for about a week. So make sure to download
Oh, okay.
the recording onto your device because we storm in our Zoom cloud.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Margo. That was great.
Thanks so much for being here.
Definitely, thanks for tag team here to go a little ping pong back and forth on poetry. It was great.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you.
Great
very much.
discussion.
Thank
Take care, everybody.
All
Yeah.
right, take care.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Hope
You
to see
too.
you all again.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.